Minnesota's past is filled with quiet puzzles carved into stone, buried in forests, and hidden along riverbanks. From mysterious petroglyph fields to ancient quarries and mound complexes older than written history, the state holds clues to cultures that lived, traded, and traveled here long before modern maps. These mysteries still spark questions we haven't fully answered. Jeffers Petroglyphs, the carved plains enigma. If you ever find yourself driving through the open grasslands of southwestern Minnesota, you might not expect anything unusual to be hiding out there. The landscape feels simple at first glance. Wide skies, quiet fields, wind rolling across the prairie. But tucked into that calm setting is one of the most mysterious ancient sites in North America. The Jeffers Petroglyphs look like a flat stretch of pinkish rock at first, but if you kneel down and let the sunlight skim across the surface, you start to see shapes, animals, weapons, and symbols carved into the stone. And the more you look, the more the place pulls you in. It's one of those sites where the air feels heavier than the landscape suggests, almost like the earth is holding a memory. The carvings are incredibly old. Some date back 2,000 years, maybe more. Others might be as recent as the late prehistoric period. And this mix of ages is part of the mystery. It's not a single chapter. It's a whole library of moments all carved into quartzite that est almost 2 billion years old. You feel that age under your hands. Hard, unchanging, stubborn rock. The kind of surface where a message carved thousands of years ago barely fades. Walking across the expanse, you don't see the petroglyphs all at once. The images appear slowly as the lighting changes. There are shapes of bison, thunderbirds, warriors with bows, and strange geometric figures. Some designs are clear and familiar, and others feel abstract or symbolic in ways we can't decode anymore. The site covers thousands of carvings, spread across several acres, so you're never really looking at the whole story in one view. It's more like wandering through a long timeline, one symbol at a time. Archaeologists believe several cultures used the site over many centuries. The ancestors of the Dakota people considered the Quito des Prairies a sacred place. Oral traditions speak of this area as a pathway where spirits move between worlds, and when you're there in person, especially near sunset, it's easy to understand why. The rock glows, the horizon stretches forever, and the carvings seem to shift subtly as shadows change. It doesn't look like ancient graffiti. It looks like a place where people came to speak to something larger than themselves. One of the most intriguing aspects of Jeffers Petroglyphs is how many different interpretations exist. Some carvings look like hunting scenes, which would make sense for people living on the plains. Others seem etched ceremonies or spiritual stories, especially symbols like thunderbirds and other sky figures. A few carvings show tools and weapons, including atlotless spear throwers used long before the bow and arrow became common. Seeing that kind of detail cut into stone makes the past feel strangely close. You can imagine someone kneeling exactly where you are, chipping their world into the rock, point by point. Then there are the carvings that don't give up their meaning. So is spirals, grids, and shapes that could represent constellations or astronomical observations. Some researchers think the site might have served as a kind of open-air ceremonial ground or teaching space. Others suggest it could have been a place to mark solstices or seasonal changes, especially since the ridge has a clear view in every direction. But there's no single certain answer. You're left with possibilities, not conclusions. That uncertainty is part of what makes the site so compelling. You're walking on ground used by countless generations, each leaving their mark without erasing the marks that came before. Imagine how many stories were shared here, how many seasons people returned, how many times the carvings were touched, remembered, or explained by someone who understood them in a way we probably never will. Today, we study the symbols, but ancient visitors might have recognized them instantly. Being on the rock itself is a sensory experience. The quartzite is warm under the sun and it carries a kind of natural texture that almost guides your fingertips toward the carvings. Of course, you're not allowed to touch them directly now, but even standing above them, you feel that strange mix of long history and open sky. Prairie grass sways at the edges, insects buzz, and there's this calm quiet that settles around you. It doesn't feel like a museum. It feels like a place where the land is still speaking. There's also the question of why this particular ridge became such a long-standing gathering point. It doesn't sit near a major river or a well-known trade route. It's just a high-exposed piece of quartzite. But for ancient people, high ground meant visibility, symbolism, and maybe a sense of connection. Sacred sites aren't always placed where you expect. Sometimes they're simply where people felt a certain presence or power. When you spend time with the carvings, you start noticing themes. A strong focus on movement, arrows, tracks, human figures in action, a focus on animals that were central to life on the plains, and always that sense of the sky, birds, star-like shapes, lines that might map celestial moments. You can imagine ancient observers lying on this same stone, watching the stars shift through the seasons, marking patterns in a way that let them understand their world better. What strikes me the most is how the site blends everyday life with deeper symbolism. A hunter might carve a bison to honor a successful hunt. A storyteller might carve a thunderbird to pass down a legend. A leader might create a symbol marking a moment of transition. And all these carvings sit next to each other, not arranged in any obvious order. That randomness feels human. We don't always organize our thoughts or memories neatly either. In the present day, Jeffers Petroglyphs is carefully protected. Trails keep visitors on specific paths, and the staff adjust viewing time so people can see the carvings when the lighting is best. Early morning or late afternoon gives the symbols the most definition. I'd say sunset is the moment when the site feels most alive. The red tones of the quartz deepen and the carvings stand out with a soft clarity that feels almost intentional, as if the artists carved them, knowing this light would reveal them. The site isn't without challenges. Weather takes its toll. Lichen grows on the rock. Even the natural wear from wind and temperature changes affects the carvings over time. Preservation teams work constantly to slow that process, but you can sense the fragility of it all. These symbols have survived thousands of years, but they won't last forever. Being there gives you that bittersweet awareness. Your experience is part of the moment in history where the carvings still exist. Visitors have mixed reactions. Some people walk the trail quickly and say the figures are hard to see. Others spend an hour on a single slab of rock waiting for the light to shift just enough to reveal another detail. I think it depends on your patience and your willingness to let the place speak in its own quiet way. It's not a site that shouts its significance, it whispers it. My own impression is that Jeffers Petroglyphs feels like a crossroads, not of roads, but of eras and emotions. You're stepping through a doorway that thousands of people stepped through before the modern world even existed. And the setting is so peaceful that the weight of that history takes a moment to sink in. Once it does, it's hard to shake. Today, the surrounding prairie is still mostly untouched. The horizon is open. You can hear your own footsteps. For all the mystery, the site has this calming presence. It is easy to stand there and imagine how ancient people found meaning in the same skies and seasons. Whether the carvings were ceremonial, educational, spiritual, or all of the above, they remind you that ancient cultures didn't just survive out here. They thrived, observed, and created art that still holds power. In the end, the Jeffers Petroglyphs remain a puzzle, a beautiful one, a human one. And if you ever visit Tikchimi, let the light do its work. You might not decode the deeper meanings carved into the quartzite, but you'll feel the presence of the people who left them behind. The Grand Mound Complex at Rainy River. If you follow the Rainy River as it winds along the northern edge of Minnesota, you eventually reach a quiet stretch of land that doesn't look like much at first glance. It's forest, riverbank, and marsh, simple, unhurried country. But tucked into that landscape is one of the largest and most mysterious ancient earthworks in North America. The Grand Mound Complex isn't flashy. It doesn't tower the way people imagine pyramids or fortifications do. Instead, it sits low and wide, almost blending into the natural slope of the land. But once you understand the scale of it, and once you realize how little we truly know about its purpose, the place starts to feel like a deep, unsettling question carved into the earth itself. The centerpiece is the Grand Mound, a massive burial and ceremonial structure that stretches nearly 140 feet long and rises from the forest floor like a giant sleeping form. If you stand at the base and look up, the mound feels heavier than it looks, like you're standing beside something ancient that hasn't forgotten a thing. The site includes other mounds to spread around the area, in a way that doesn't reveal any obvious pattern. That sense of hidden design is part of the mystery. These mounds were built deliberately with serious effort and long-term purpose, but we still don't fully understand what story they were meant to preserve. Archaeologists believe the Grand Mound dates back more than 2,000 years. Created by the Laurel people, a culture that lived in the region long before the Dakota and Ogive. The Laurel left very little behind beyond stone tools, pottery, and their earth. So, The mounds are one of the strongest pieces of evidence we have for their existence. When you walk near the mound, you can feel that lack of information. It's almost like approaching a locked room without a key. Everything about the site says it mattered deeply, but it doesn't say why. One of the most striking features is the tail-like extension that stretches from the main mound down toward the river. Some researchers think it may represent a serpent, an idea that would link this site to other serpent-shaped mounds across the Midwest. Others argue it might have been a ceremonial walkway or a guide for processions during important gatherings. The truth is we don't know, and the shape seems to shift depending on how you view it. From certain angles, it does resemble a serpent's body. From others, it looks more like a natural ridge enhanced by human hands. That uncertainty invites speculation from everyone who visits, from archaeologists to casual explorers. Inside the mound are burials, but it's unlikely that the site was meant only as a cemetery. The sheer scale and careful layout suggests a broader purpose, something ceremonial, astronomical, or possibly political. Some researchers think the mound may have been a gathering point, a place where different groups met seasonally to trade, celebrate, or mourn. Others believe it might have been tied to specific celestial events. Sites like this often align with solstices or cardinal directions, and while the Grand Mound does show signs of intentional orientation, nothing lines up perfectly enough for a definitive answer. Walking the grounds today feels a bit surreal because the forest has reclaimed so much of the surrounding area. You hear birds, wind through the leaves, and the slow movement of the river. It's peaceful, but the presence of the mound breaks that peacefulness in a quiet way. You can't walk on it anymore. It's protected, but even standing nearby gives you that odd sense that you are reintruding on something that once carried enormous emotional weight. It doesn't feel abandoned so much as dormant, like the energy that shaped the mound is still there beneath the surface. One thing that stands out is how the landscape itself seems connected to the purpose of the mound. The Rainy River forms a natural boundary that ancient cultures would have relied on for movement, food, and communication. Some archaeologists believe the mound builders may have chosen this specific spot because of the way the river bends, and how the land rises slightly above the floodplain. High ground near water was always valuable, but the choice to pour thousands of hours of labor into reshaping the earth here speaks to a meaning deeper than practicality. When you look closely at the mound's shape, you start thinking about how many people it would have taken to build it. Earthworks like this weren't created quickly. They required coordinated effort, planning, and a shared belief system strong enough to motivate an entire community. That alone tells us the Laurel culture was more organized and spiritually connected than we sometimes assume. These aren't the works of scattered nomadic groups. This is the work of people who cared about marking their world in a lasting way. Yet for all that intentionality, the site doesn't give up its secrets. There are no written records, no surviving oral traditions tied directly to the builders. And because the site holds sacred burials, modern investigations are limited. That leaves us with only partial glimpses: soil layers, pottery fragments, and the massive shape of the mound itself. One detail that often gets overlooked is how the mound changes depending on the season. In winter, the snow outlines its shape more clearly, making the serpent-like form stand out. In summer, the greenery softens the structure, making it look more like a natural rise in the land until you notice the symmetry. At sunset, long shadows stretch across the ridge and emphasize the length of the site, and you get this eerie sense of time stretching with it. It's easy to imagine ancient people gathering here during similar moments, watching the sky shift the same way. The Grand Mound's present-day conditions are a mix of protection and isolation. The site was once open to visitors with an interpretive center, but it has since been closed to the public to protect both the cultural significance and the fragile earth. That decision has been controversial. Some people feel such history should be shared openly. Others believe the site shouldn't be disturbed. Standing outside the restricted boundary, you can understand both perspectives. The silence around the mound gives it dignity, but it also keeps its story at a distance. Even with restricted access, the area around the mound is still worth visiting. The Rainy River is calm and steady, and the surrounding forest has a quiet beauty. There's a sense that this landscape hasn't changed much in hundreds of years. That continuity makes the mound feel even older. It becomes a conversation between the past and the present that never quite finishes. My own impression is that the Grand Mound feels less like a monument and more like a presence. It's subtle, almost shy, but unmistakably important. You don't walk away with answers. You walk away with questions. Good questions. The kind that stay in your mind for days. Who were the people who built this? What rituals were held here? What stories did they tell? And why did this particular spot matter so much? Sites like this reminds you that ancient cultures weren't simple. They had beliefs, fears, celebrations, and complex social worlds. The Grand Mound hints at all of that without spelling anything out directly. And somehow, that makes the mystery stronger. Today, the mound sits quietly, shielded from heavy foot traffic, but still carrying the weight of its history. You can't climb it, but you can stand near it and feel what thousands of years look like when they reshaped into the land itself. It's peaceful, but not empty, beautiful, but not entirely calm. And in that mix, the mystery lives on. The ancient quarry site at Knife River Flint trade route. If you trace the old indigenous trade routes of the northern plains, you eventually come across a material that shaped entire cultures long before metal tools ever appeared. Knife River Flint isn't flashy at first. It is a dark chocolate-teckled stone with a smooth texture and a subtle shine when the light hits it. But for thousands of years, this stone was one of the most valued materials in North America, and tucked into western Minnesota and eastern North Dakota is the ancient quarry system where people mined it, shaped it, and traded it across a huge network that stretched farther than most people realize. Today, the site feels quiet and unassuming, but when you stand there long enough, you start to understand how much history passed through this landscape. What makes Knife River Flint so special is how workable it is. You can chip it in clean, control flakes to create razor-sharp edges. Spear points, knives, scrapers, arrowheads, everything came out smooth and precise. Ancient toolmakers loved it because it stayed sharp and broke predictably. You could take a chunk of this flint and with enough skill turn it into a blade you could trust in the middle of a hunt. Even now, archaeologists handling these artifacts talk about the quality like modern craftsmen praising a perfect piece of steel. The quarry itself doesn't look like a mine in the modern sense. You don't see tunnels or huge pits. Instead, the landscape is dotted with hundreds of shallow depressions and scattered waste flakes, chips of stone left behind from tool making. When you walk over them, you start noticing how the ground sparkles slightly with the remnants of ancient work. It's subtle, but once you see it, you feel it everywhere. This was an industrial center long before anyone used the word industrial. Thousands of people from different groups came through here over millennia, gathering materials, shaping tools, and trading goods. One of the mysteries surrounding the Knife River Flint quarries is how far the material traveled. Artifacts made from this stone have been found all across the Great Plains throughout the Midwest, up into Canada, and even as far as the Appalachian Mountains. That means this wasn't just a local resource. It was part of a massive network, one of the earliest long-distance trade systems in North America. And every piece that traveled started here in these pits and work areas carved out of prairie soil. You get the sense that this place wasn't just about stone, it was about connection. Groups who might not have shared language or customs still crossed paths here. They traded stories, exchanged goods, forged alliances, and carried news between distant communities. The quarry wasn't a city, but it had the energy of a gathering point. You can imagine the sound of stone cracking under expert hands, the smell of fires burning nearby, and the movement of people coming and going in cycles that lasted centuries. When archaeologists study the site, they find evidence of long-term organized activity. Some pits were dug deeper than others. Some areas show signs of seasonal use. Others look like dedicated production zones, where toolmakers shaped raw chunks into finished blades. That level of specialization tells us the people working here weren't just casually picking up stone. They understood the material intimately. The quarry wasn't random, it was systematic. But despite all this evidence of work and trade, there are still unanswered questions. We don't know exactly how different groups organized access to the quarry. Was it controlled by a single community? Was it neutral ground? Did families return generation after generation, or was it more transient? The landscape offers clues, but not clear answers. When you walk the ground, you catch yourself wondering how many footsteps followed the same routes, how many people knelt in the same spots to test a stone's strength with a quick tap. What makes the place even more interesting is how it feels today. Much of the quarry area has been preserved, and the surrounding prairie has grown back in a way that quiets the land. The wind moves steadily, carrying the dry sound of grass rubbing against itself. Birds pass overhead. It's peaceful now, but there's an energy beneath the calm. You sense how busy it must have been, how much intention each depression and scatter of flakes represents. Even if you don't see dramatic structures, The weight of time sits in the soil. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Knife River Flint trade is how it changed over time. Early on, the material was shaped into large spear points, used for hunting massive animals, bison, elk, and earlier. As centuries passed and tools evolved, the flint was shaped into smaller, more refined points and blades. But the demand never went away. Even when other stones became popular in different regions, Knife River Flint held its place. It had a reputation, and reputation travels far. The fact that the quarry remained active for so long is one of its greatest mysteries. Most ancient quarries eventually fill in, get abandoned, or lose their importance. But this one kept drawing people back. Something about the stone kept its value high across cultures and centuries. Some archaeologists think the flint had symbolic weight, not just practical use. Maybe it carried spiritual meaning. Or maybe it became part of ceremonies. When a material shows up that consistently in burial sites and sacred areas, you start to wonder if it was more than a tool. As for the conditions today, the quarries are protected but still visible if you know what to look for. The depressions in the soil remain, though softened by time. Scattered flakes still appear, though they are now left untouched by visitors. The site sits in a region where the prairie stretches wide and quiet, and that openness feels like part of the history. You can walk along designated paths, look down at the ground, and imagine ancient hands working those pieces thousands of years ago. One challenge the site faces is erosion. Prairie landscapes shift slowly, but water and wind still wear down the edges of old pits. Some areas have been stabilized while others are left undisturbed to keep the site as natural as possible. The fact that so many artifacts remain in place is rare, and there's constant balancing between research and preservation. Too much excavation would damage the context. Too little and we miss opportunities to understand the deeper story. For all the careful protection, the quarry still feels approachable. It's not fenced off or overshadowed by buildings. You can stand among the pits and feel the land breathe. The knowledge that ancient toolmakers stood in the same spot gives the whole area a quiet gravity. It's not dramatic. It's steady, grounded, and powerfully human. My own impression is that the Knife River Flint quarries feel like the hidden heartbeat of an ancient world. Not a monument, not a mystery in the symbolic sense, but something that supported life across a huge region. The stone from here moved farther than many people ever traveled. It connected cultures that may have never met face to face. And it shaped tools that fed families, protected hunters, and formed part of ceremonies we can only imagine. When you stand there today, with the wind moving across the grass and the ground, soft under your feet, you sense how much happened here without leaving big dramatic ruins behind. It's a reminder that not all ancient mysteries are towering structures. Some are quiet, practical, and deeply woven into everyday life. And sometimes those are the mysteries that feel the most real. The hidden water glyphs of Lake Superior. If you spend enough time along the shores of Lake Superior, especially in those quieter coves, where the waves carve into the rock with slow patience, you start noticing shapes that don't look entirely natural. Lines that curve too deliberately, marks that repeat in ways water alone wouldn't create.